First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I was invited by Harry and my clients from Diamond Voice, and we're going to really talk about practical sales tips that can hopefully give you great momentum on Monday. So I've got some ground rules here. The ground rules are we're going to engage, we're going to have fun, and there's a simple questionnaire at the end. If you could please complete it, I would appreciate it very much. So the first, I got to point it this way. All right. So how many people here have had a horrible experience with obnoxious salespeople? Raise your hand, because I have too, right? They're pushy, they're terrible, we don't want anything to do with them. I remember this commercial that came on. Go back. And at the end of the commercial, they said, don't worry, a salesperson is not going to contact you. What a relief. My undergraduate degree is in marketing. That's what I really wanted to do. I took classes, I loved it, and I started interviewing, and they said, well, buddy, you got a problem. You don't have any experience in marketing. Why don't you just start out in sales? I had just attended a time-sharing presentation. Anybody here attended a time-sharing presentation? I said, you got to be kidding me. What a bunch of creeps. I want nothing to do with that profession. So then I looked into it, and you know what I found out? I said, well, I have to ask people for orders. I have to build a pipeline. I have to have all kinds of meetings that result in great meetings. I have to have great presentation skills. They're going to object. What am I going to do there? I have to deal with the dreaded competition. I have to have great closing skills. And then they're all going to go silent. What am I going to do there? So I thought, why would I ever want to go into sales? It's horrible. And then a funny thing happened. They said, well, you got to try it anyway. So I said, all right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find out what sales is all about. And here's what I found out. Sales is simple. It's how you can find out what someone needs and help them to get it. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That's a great thing. I can have so much fun with that. But then it got even better, because then I found out that the more helping you do, they actually compensate you very well to do that. But then it gets even better, because then I found out that the more helping you do, the more money you can make. And then it got even better, because then they said there's no limitations on how much helping you can do and how much money you can make. So I tried it out, and it lasted only 40 years. And it was the best career in the world. I can't imagine anything better. I loved it. And I wouldn't give it up for anything. So raise your hand if you're in sales. Some of you did. Some of you did not. And those that did not failed the test, because the reality is, sorry, I went too fast, all of you are in sales, because we're all trying to generate revenue, aren't we? We're all in sales. So what am I going to do today? I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm going to take you on a journey because this is partially the feedback that I got. I asked for some feedback. I went to Vanessa and I said, you know what, I don't know this crowd. I want to make sure that I make it about them. So can you tell me what they want to hear about? And they said, well, we'd like to know how to generate activity, how to really differentiate ourselves from others. How can we have meetings that are effective? How can we present properly? How can we handle all those objections? How can we close a sale? How can we follow up with our customers? How can we leverage our customers? And finally, how do we get great referrals? A lot of the stuff that we talked about before. So that's the journey we're going to go on today. Sound good? So there's all kinds of ways, there's all kinds of companies that will tell you we can help you generate leads. Well, they're all out there. They all do a great job. But you know what they don't do? They don't realize that there's one thing that's kind of important, and that's you got to somehow turn it into revenue, because what is revenue? Revenue is the oxygen that's going to fuel your business. If it doesn't turn into sales, what difference does it make? So you want to ask the question. These are really important questions. Do you really know how you're going to reach your goals? Do you know that? And the second question is, do you really have the selling skills to influence a decision? And this is really important, where the outcome, the results, are bigger than the investment. Think about that, because that's why people buy, why they make the decision. So I always talk about sales is a learned skill. Now, why do I think that way? Many years ago, I got married. We saved up our money. We had nothing. Saved up our money. After a year, we got our first house. You get a house, what happens? You know what happens. Things break. Things have to be fixed. My wife looked at me, and she found out something she didn't know. She looked at me, and she said, Gary, you got to fix all that stuff. And she found out that I am very, very, very handy at writing checks. I didn't have that skill. I'm not a handyman. I never have been. I never will be. I didn't have the skill. I didn't have the confidence. But that's what sales really is, isn't it? You have to have the skill. You have to have the confidence. If you don't have that, you're not going to be very successful. All right, raise your hand if you love being told what to do. Let me see if anybody, no one raises their hand. All right. So you got to answer me this question. I've been to a lot of sales training programs. They're very similar. And they all tell you that you should tell your clients two things. You should tell them how great you are, and you should tell them how great your products and services are. What's wrong with that? You just got through telling me you don't want to be told what to do. We all do this. We all go to the doctor's office. Does the doctor say, here's all my plaques, here's how great I am? No. What does the doctor do? The doctor says, where does it hurt? Would you ever go to a doctor and allow them to prescribe before they diagnose? Right? Makes sense, right? Now, I go to a lot of networking events. We've got a great one here. Everybody gets to do their 30-second pitch. Everybody tells everybody how great they are. And if I see 10 insurance people, 10 real estate people, 10 mortgage people, they're all basically saying the same thing. This is what we do. This is why we're great. They all sound the same. You ever notice when this happens, everybody ignores it? What I tell all these people at the networking event is, what I just heard, it's a bunch of noise. All sounds the same. There's no difference. So what are the best practices to really help you to build your pipeline of qualified prospects? Well, the first thing, you got to have goals. It's amazing to me how many people don't have goals. Establish what you want to do. The second thing is you better figure out, not that you're selling mortgages or that you're selling real estate or insurance or whatever you do, but what makes you different. You got to be different. You got to figure that out. What is your differentiation? What makes you stand out? And then the thing that's often lacking, think about your market. Think about your customers you're trying to get to. Learn what's important to them. They're not all the same. They all have different needs. Take the time to learn about them. And then what you do, and it's what I did to be successful in my career in sales and sales management, managing teams, is I call it the magnet effect. You simply want to connect your differentiation, what you do really well, to what you've identified is important to them. And if you can do that, you know what you're doing? Simple. I call it leading them down a path without them realizing they're being led. Because all you're doing is you're just simply going in and asking questions based on what you know, and the answers, by pure coincidence, happen to be what you excel at. Sales is very challenging. We send out all kinds of stuff, all of us. We have, particularly with social media, there's so much stuff we do, and we all know most of it gets ignored. It's hard. It really is. We're inundated with technology. Technology is great. Technology is awful. Now, we all go to events, and what do they say? Give your 30-second elevator pitch. Anybody know the origin of the elevator pitch? Anybody know that? The elevator pitch is actually really simple. The concept is you're in an elevator with someone, and they say, oh, who are you? What do you do? You get 30 seconds to tell them what you do and to motivate them to the point that when that elevator door opens up, they say two things. 2 words. Can we hear more? Or 3 words. Can we hear more? You've given them enough nuggets that they want more. Most people, when they do an elevator pitch, just talk about themselves, how great they are. And I tell them, I haven't heard a thing. Because an effective elevator pitch, it's so simple. It's 3 things. It's, what are the specific problems that you address? How do you address it? Getting back to what we talked about before, your differentiators. And then expected results. Simple. That's really what separates you. And all of your communication, all of it, if you think about it logically, can and should evolve from your elevator pitch. So a couple of other things I like to say that can make it even better. Who do you know that could use these services? Always start with a question. Have you ever given thought to? That kind of thing. Always use a success story, and then, of course, your ask. Based on what you've heard, what do you think? That's an elevator pitch. Best practices for getting a conversation going. You're trying desperately to meet with people. It all starts with meetings, right? Don't ask them to meet so you could talk about your products and services. Don't. We're all human beings. Say, I'd like to have a conversation with you. That's all we want to do. We want to have a conversation. Don't sell a product or service. Tell them that you want to help them with what you understand based on what you know about them, how you can help them. That's why people buy. Find out why people buy. Create a sense of urgency. One of the biggest single problems that salespeople make, they make a lot, but salespeople don't understand that when you have a meeting with someone and they say, it sounds great, Gary, when can we go? I'm all excited. What I haven't identified is the difference between nice to have and have to have. I have a friend that was selling roofing. He would go around the neighborhoods and he'd look at all the roofs that were terrible, and he couldn't get anywhere. You know who called him? The first time it rained and there's a hole in the guy's roof. Now he has to have. You have to identify and understand the difference between nice to have and have to have. And it's always great to share success stories from similar clients. Now, when we meet with people, again, we're human beings, right? We meet with salespeople, and I'm the same way. What do? We go like this. We all resist. We don't know you. We know what your motive is. You want to try to make a sale just like that time-sharing person. We all do that. So there are a lot of ways that I can get people to open up. But the most effective technique there is, in my opinion, to get people to relax and open up. Anyone want to try this one? Anyone raise their hand? The most effective technique there is. No takers? Those are all good, but it's not my answer. All right. If I want people to relax and I want people to talk, here's what I'm going to do. Humor. If I can get them to laugh, I'll get them to talk. Right? We're all smiling. We heard that, right? And we have to know how to use humor. You know, the best way is make fun of yourself. You did a great job of that. But it works, right? I mean, you want to get people to relax because you can't have a conversation with people unless they're relaxed, because then they might be willing to talk to you at that point. So now we have a meeting. We did all these things to get people interested. We want to have the conversation. We have a meeting. Have an agenda with expectations. Mr. Customer, glad we're meeting. This is what we're planning on doing today. Is it okay if I can ask you some questions? Get their permission. You want to ask questions where you're connecting the dots. We talked about this before, to what you do versus how you think you can help them. The best question is, wow, no one ever asked me that before. Questions that really get them to think. Those are the best kind of questions. And avoid the interrogation. I had a guy come to me recently because I needed gutters. He came with 5 pages of questions, and I finally said, you know what, you got to go. I said, I'm dizzy because this feels like an interrogation. I said, I'm looking for the light that's over my head. People hate that, right? We don't like an interrogation, so make it relaxing for them. You're there to help them, aren't you? Prepare for anticipated objections. If you're not prepared for it, boy, the worst feeling in the world is when I would get objections and I wasn't ready for them. There's only so many times I can say, what a great question, no one's ever asked me that one before. Always agree upon next steps. You never want to have a meeting end and then it ends. You know, let's talk about the next steps. And finally, how do you qualify a client? I'm going to go to one of my clients here, is Hamid. We use an acronym called MANT. Now, it doesn't matter what your product or services are. You can qualify someone to know if they're a good prospect based on MANT. Can we hear you, Hamid? You want to try it? That's correct. So I need to find out, can they pay for it? Am I dealing with someone that could sign the contract? Does the client understand the need, and what is the timeline? If I'm not hitting that, I'm wasting my time. I don't have a really good prospect. Thanks, Hamid. Now, the client says, I want a proposal from you. I want you to present. How many times does that happen? Most of the time, we get that, right? So then, here are my best practices. Very often, how often do they say, just send me the proposal? Well, what I'm going to suggest is if they say, send me the proposal, go on Amazon, and what they do is they sell these little trash cans that you can buy, and you may as well send the trash can with it because you may as well say, that's where it's going to end up anyways, so I may as well make it easy for you. Don't ever do that. You got to present live. Now, how many times I would be on sales calls with salespeople, and they go in and they have a proposal that has about 25 pages in it that tells the client everything they need to know about their product. And I would ask them, do you really think that they're going to read that? No. The newspapers get it right. Summary, details. Just give them what they need to see. What they need to see is, what are the problems that we talked about? What is the solution we talked about? Because that's why they're going to buy. And they're going to buy based on what it means to them. Ultimately, understanding me and how you're going to help me and what it means to me. See, I keep getting back to how you're going to help me, because that's what sales really is. They ask you to demonstrate. I have a client that sells shipping software, and they would get leads all the time, and I would say, great, what do you do with the leads? And they say, well, we go through a whole demonstration, soup to nuts. And I said, how many clients do you get out of that? They became silent. And I said, here's what you want to do. The next time they ask you to demonstrate, you're going to answer with one word. You know what that word is? No. Tell them, I need to understand why you called me. I need to understand what your problems are so I can see if I can help you. And then if I can help you, I'm going to demonstrate, and I'm only going to show you the thing that is important to you, because the other stuff I'm going to show you, you don't care about anyway, so why should we be wasting our time? If you can do that, then you actually have the opportunity to turn it into a sale. We use a concept called if-then. Mr. Customer, if I can show you this that's really important, will you have the comfort level to move forward? It's a great closing technique. So a couple of other things. You want to always get agreement on the next steps when you're in a meeting. Never leave it open-ended. Get the client to articulate the value. Now, this is something that most salespeople, in my opinion, miss. We understand the problems. We understand the solution we're bringing. You want the client to communicate. The power of affirmations is powerful. Get the client to communicate what their problems are. Get the client to communicate what is going to solve the problem. If they think it's their idea, you're 90% there. I mean, you're at the two-yard line at that point. It's so important. And then they understand the most important word, value. Because then if price comes up, the dreaded word price, then it's a non-issue because price is irrelevant because you've got them focused on the most important thing, value, what they're getting out of it. Understand the approval process. If it's not the person you're with and they say, oh, we have to present it with someone else, you want to be with that person, but more often than not, we can't get to that person, right? So what do? We say, okay, now you don't know him or her. How are they going to react to this? Do a role play. What concerns are they going to have? Good, let's go over them. Let me prepare you for them. If you do that, you're doing two things. Number one, you're dramatically increasing your chances that your proposal is going to be accepted. But the most important thing, this is a fringe benefit, is think about that person who now needs to present it to that other. They're not comfortable. They're not ready for the objections. You've just made their life so much easier. I spent 20 years selling to law firms. I used to deal with the executive director. They hated having to go to the partnership, to the managing partners, because let's face it, lawyers, my son's a lawyer, they argue for a living. They're very difficult people to deal with. So they don't want to have to present and deal with all the objections. I made their life so much easier. I would do that. We'd go through the role play. I had a 95% close rate by doing that. And then you want to find out when to use testimonials. We all have testimonials. We say, Mr. Client, let me give you all the testimonials. Again, you may as well get the trash can. No one's going to read them. Use testimonials as a validation source once you've done your job. If you've identified the needs, if you've identified the solution, and the customer is shaking their head and so forth, and they have a concern about one particular item, then you can say, as a matter of fact, let me show you this one testimonial that directly relates to that concern you had. Then it will be relevant. So use them the right way. They're like anything, they're great tools, and use them correctly. Harry, you love this. I put the slide up for you. All right, so I do sales training for a living. Customers have also been trained. Now, does anybody, this is a university, does anybody know what this stands for, CTU? Right, no, Customer Training University. Customers have gotten really smart. They are prepared for us. They say things to make us go away. It works. So one of the biggest objections we always get, sounds great, but not in the budget. Anybody hear about, my friend Peter? Paul's always robbing him. This, in my humble opinion, it's not only one of the most common objections, but it's one of the most BS objections. Let me explain why. We all have things in our life that we want to get, that we need to get. We all have budgets, but when we need to get something and we want to get something, don't we do this? We sort of move things from one side to another. We all rob Peter to pay Paul. Why does it happen? Anybody want to take a shot at this one? Why does it happen? Yeah. We recognize that we have a need or a desire or a want or whatever. Now, that only happens if you, as a salesperson, have done a good job of getting the customer to recognize that you have a need that has to be addressed right now. Money, authority, need, time frame. You've done that. They're more than willing to do it because we all do it. So I want to go through a couple of best practices on handling objections because we all get them. The first is they give you an objection, isolate it. Mr. Customer, if that wasn't the case, I know you're concerned about price or whatever. If that wasn't the case, would you be willing to move forward, right? They're going to say one of two things. They're going to say, yes. So now you know, okay, well, that's the obstacle I have to get over. And if they say no, then you know that there's other objections out there that you need to overcome if you're going to move forward. One of the most common ways to deal with anybody that has an objection, use empathy. It's called the feel, felt, found formula. It works. I understand exactly how you feel, Mr. Customer. As a matter of fact, most of our customers felt the exact same way, and then they found from their experience that it really was not an issue at all. As a matter of fact, they loved it. This is great. How are other decisions made? Obviously, this is not the first time you've had a salesperson like me in front of you. How did you make other decisions? Ask them that. And ask them their ideas to how to address it. I mentioned this before. It's amazing to me how many times we get objections and we're not ready for them. It's almost inexcusable. If you're selling the same solutions over and over and over and over again, you're going to hear the same objections over and over and over again. So why not be prepared for them? And I mean be prepared. I had a salesperson that said, hold on, let me look at my notes to see how I should respond to that. No, be ready. I love this. Call me in 6 months. How many times do we hear that? You know what my response is? Great. What is going to change in 6 months? What's going to change? Put them on the spot. And they'll tell you, yes or no. They'll tell you whether they're full of you know what. I like this. We can't pay that extra money. That's so much more. Maybe it's like $500 more. And I'll say, okay, let me ask you something. 2 years from now, I want you to think about this and ask yourself, do you really think you're going to remember the $500 difference? No, you're going to remember what you're living with or what you're not living with. I mean, we all buy cars. Do we remember how much money we saved or didn't save in our last car? No, we forget very quickly. It's with everything. Visualization. It works, again, if you've done a great job in getting them to realize how silly it is to worry about a $500 difference because they're going to forget it as long as they understand the value. If all else fails, let me go back to that job that I had selling to the law firms. As a raw kid, well before I had gray hair, I was trained on exactly what to do. I met with a large law firm, an executive director, and I'm asking all the questions. I'm doing everything I was supposed to do exactly the way I was told to do it. Every answer is the exact same way. We don't have a problem. No, 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 we're good, we're good, we're good. I'm getting nowhere, and I couldn't understand, what am I doing wrong? I'm following the program. I don't know what made me think about it, but I had a pen in my hand that I was using to take notes. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Let's for a minute say that this pen is not a pen. It's a magic wand. And let me ask you this. If you could change anything at all, because all I've heard about is how great a job you do. If you could change anything at all, what would you do? Now, the important thing for me is I had to shut up, which is not easy when you're in sales. And she said, well, as a matter of fact, I've often thought about doing such and such. And I said, now, they give you a little rope, you got to run with it. And I go, really? What do you mean by that? One thing led to another, and she actually became one of my best clients. What did I learn from that? Get the client to think that it's their idea. Get the client to feel that they're in control, even though you're sort of running the show, but they feel that they're in control. I had her feel that she was in control because I knew she had a big ego. And she thought the whole thing was her idea. And all I was doing is that leading someone down a path without them realizing they're being led. That's all I was doing. And it worked. All right, so you've made a great presentation. Everything sounds great. And, you know, people like to say, you know, the competition, we respect them. You know how much respect I had for the competition? I hated them. I have kids to feed. The competition is taking food away from my kids. I hated them. But there's ways that you have to professionally deal with the competition because you can't down the competition. It's unprofessional. You can't do that. First question is when and how to bring it up. The worst feeling is you've done a great presentation. They say they're going to go with you. Silence. Then you find out, oh, we went with your competition. You never had an opportunity to go through the differences. I'm thinking, oh, my God, I blew it. But I had a salesperson that was doing a great job. We're at the very end. We were about to get the sale. And he said, were you planning on looking at the competition? And he said, you know what? We hadn't even thought about that. What a great idea. So what do? The answer is you go through the process and you say, what are the next steps in your process to bring this to a close? Because if they're planning on looking at the competition, they will tell you that, and it gives you an opportunity then to address it. We talked about the importance of having great discovery questions. Great discovery questions are to identify problems that you're going to address with your solutions. But you can also, if you do it the right way, and I've done this my whole career, completely eliminate the competition. You imagine eliminating the competition. Now, how do you do that? It's the way you're asking the questions. If you know the things that you do better than everybody else, ask a question where the answer, which basically the client is saying, this is what I need, happens to be what only you do and you do better, and you've eliminated the competition, which then gets to the third point here. They say, well, we're looking at you and we're looking at everybody else. And you have to go through and compare, right? You never want to down the competition. You can't say, we're better than them for these reasons, because A, it's coming from you, and B, they don't want to hear it anyway. So what I started doing is I got a piece of paper out and a pen, and I said, let's have a couple of vertical lines. Let's make 3 columns. Now, this only works, again, if you've done a great job of getting them to understand their needs and their problems. Column number 1, let's go through the problems that we talked about. Column number 2, let's go through, typically in the industry, what we call industry standards, how those problems are addressed. Column number 3, let's go through what we discussed, what you agreed on as to what you need to address those problems. Right? Remember we talked about? And get them to shake their head. So you go through one at a time, and what I'm looking at is one thing. I'm looking at their head. I want them shaking their head like this. Because by the end, if you do this process, which I've done my entire career, you will hear 2 words. You know what those are? Anybody? Come on, Harry? I'm sold. Over and over again. Because they realize, without you saying a word about the competition, that all you're doing is going through that process for them. Now, you go in, and everybody, if you're going in new, is using somebody else. And you got to get them you want them to tell you what they like and don't like about the competition. If I walk in and someone's had a vendor for years and years and years, they're going to be very loyal, which I respect, and I ask them, what don't you like about them? What are the chances that they're going to tell me? They're going to open up and say everything they don't like about them. None. They're going to protect them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I really respect the fact that you've been with vendor A for all these years. What do you like about them? Let them talk. Then I say, now, let me ask you this. If you could have them do anything different, what are some of the things that you would like them to do, or maybe you'd like them to do better? Again, shut up. Let them talk. Well, we've often thought about, geez, we'd love them to do such and such better, or it would be great if they offered this particular service. Really, what do you mean by that? And you can see where I'm going with this. Also, by asking them, and this is an amazing thing, by asking them to tell you what you like about them, you've sort of gotten their permission now to tell you what they don't like about them, what they want them to do better. So it's a great technique that really works. The best closing technique is none. What do I mean by that? It means that if you've done a great job where the customer clearly identifies what they need and they clearly see how you're going to provide them with the solution, you shouldn't have to say anything. As a matter of fact, I can't tell you how many times in that scenario they come to me and they say, this sounds great, how do we move forward? Isn't that what we want? So we have to close the sale, and assuming that they didn't just come to you and say, when can we get it, how soon can we get it, there are different things that can work. One is we call it the trial and the assumptive close. So what do we mean by that? So you've gone through the process, they're shaking their head, they like everything. I call it taking their temperature. Well, Bob, based on everything that you've heard, based on everything we've covered, how does it sound? They're going to tell you, it sounds good? Great. Then we use what we call the assumptive close. Don't ask them, do you want to move forward? Because then they might say yes or no. Say, great. Here's what I recommend as the next steps. You've earned the right to do that. And it works. It's very, very effective. You want to get them to shake their head, and then finally the alternative close. Do you want it Wednesday or Sunday or whatever makes sense? It works. You have a great meeting, great presentation. There's a new term that I hear all the time. I didn't hear this back years ago, but they ghosted me. It's like a new term today. They went silent. I can't get them. They're ignoring me, whatever you want to do, right? So here's the problem. We as salespeople, we are told, follow up. Make sure you're following up with them, right? And what do we do when we follow up? We get on the phone, we use email, whatever you do, and we say, I'm Gary Kurtis, we met on such and such, haven't heard from you, just want to follow up to see how you're doing with that proposal. Now, there is something that I refer to as the 50-50 syndrome. That means, why would you ask a question if there's at least a 50% chance you're not going to get the answer you're looking for? Because when they say, nothing has changed, where do we go from here? So I stopped doing it completely. And what I started doing is I would call them up and say, you know what, I just heard about this great solution. Maybe it wasn't even something that we provide. And I immediately thought about you, so why don't we get together? Now, what I really wanted is just something to break the ice, right? And more often than not, we get together, and you know what happens? We talk about where we are in the sales process. Finally, if all else fails, guilt works. You know, we met, did all this work, I gave you the proposal, haven't heard anything. Maybe it's me. What did I do wrong? Is there something you're waiting for from me? Are you waiting? What did I do wrong? And they'll say, oh, no, it wasn't you. And they tell you what the issue is. It works. Why does this all work? Everything we've talked about today? Because we're dealing with human beings. Now, we've talked about going out and finding customers, and you know, it's a process, and we've gone through a lot of best practices this morning on how to do it. But the best way to get customers, Dorothy had this right in The Wizard of Oz. It was there all along. Go to your current customers. They're your golden goose. But they're only going to provide customers and give you more eggs if you treat them the right way. Meet with them regularly. I can't tell you how many times we meet with customers, maybe once a year. No, meet with them all the time. Get their feedback. And when you meet with them, get them to tell you why they love you. What benefits are they getting from the product? Because then you can say, as a matter of fact, it's great that you're getting all this. Would you now like to hear about some other things that you can get, some additional benefits that you can get? I'm not here to sell you anything. I haven't used the word sale. I'm saying you can expand those benefits to some other areas. Do surveys to validate their customer service, that they're happy with you. Now, anybody ever, you got to be honest with me, anybody have an upset customer ever? Raise your hand. Who loves upset customers? No one's raising their hand. I loved them. Okay, good. I loved upset customers. Why? Because it gives me an opportunity to turn it around. Some of my best customers are the ones that are upset. Mr. Customer, I'm so sorry to hear that. I will take personal responsibility to make sure that is fixed. I will get everybody involved. I will keep you updated along the way. If I do that, I've got a customer for life. Some of the best things you can do. All right. We're almost at the end here. Referrals. There's two types of referrals. Referrals when I have a new client and referrals from other people that are going to refer us. So first, when we have a new client, we do the work. At the very end, Mr. Client, now that you're happy, would you give me a referral? They say yes. More often than not, everybody goes on their way, and where's that referral? It never happens. So what I did is I stopped doing that. I started at the very beginning of the relationship. Mr. Customer, thank you very much for agreeing to move forward with us. I'd like to ask you something. We're going to play Let's Make a Deal. We value you as a customer. If at the very end you're happy, would you be willing to give us a testimonial, a referral? And we're sort of making a deal, and the fringe benefit there is they know that we are there and we want to do a good job because we want to get paid. But they also know that we are motivated to really do a great job because we want that testimonial. So try that and it works. The other type of referrals is we all do networking. We want everybody to give us referrals, and I see this all the time. We meet, we do one-on-ones, everything goes great, and there's a difference between what I call active and passive referrals, meaning that a passive referral is, great, now I know what you do. If I hear about something like that, yeah, I know who you are and what you do. That's getting on a list. You know how many referrals you get from a list? Nothing. Active referrals is where someone is motivated to actually go out and give you referrals. So how do you do that? The only way you can do that is to take the time, learn about them. Learn what's important to them. How do you find out? Ask. What are your objectives? What are your challenges? How can I help you? And if helping them by giving the referral, if it helps them, now they're motivated to go out of their way to ask for referrals. A few examples of how I help my clients. I've got many, many examples that I'm very proud of. My goal is to do what sales, as I mentioned, is all about, and that's to find out what someone needs and to help them to get it. And I really hope today that I've been able to give you enough sales tips that you've hopefully been able to get some things, and hopefully many, that can help you come Monday. My client Diamond Voice is here, and I want to point them out because these guys absolutely do an amazing job with everything that's on there. And hopefully you'll at least be willing to have a simple conversation with them so they can find out how they can also help you. Lastly, I want everybody to please complete the questionnaire. So on the sales sheet that is in your packet, there's a QR code right on the back. So all you have to do, they made it so easy. Scan the QR code and fill it out. I get your feedback, which is really important to me. And if you would like more sales tips that can help your business, I would love to do it. I would love to have that opportunity. And what I'm offering is a couple of things. I will offer a completely free initial consultation, and I'm also offering a really nice discount off my normal rates. I did it with 4 minutes to spare, so with 4 minutes to spare, since I have some time, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to throw at me? In the back. Do we want to get a microphone? Are we able to? Now I'm going to be put on the spot.
Gary, do you find that your sales techniques needs to adjust based on the industry that the person is trying to sell to, like financial services versus someone trying to sell construction services or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes and no. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, it's not one size fits all. It never is. And that's all part of me taking the time, which I do, to really learn as much as I can. When I meet with a client the first time, I focus on three things. What are your objectives? What are the things that you do really well? What are your strengths? What are your challenges? So I want to make it all about you specifically. And then a lot of the concepts, what I try to do is apply the concepts based on what I learned in that initial conversation about that person. Did that answer your question? Okay. Next question? Anybody else?
Gary, in this virtual world that we now live in, even though you're selling hard goods or hard services, do you modify your approach when you can't actually get face-to-face with them other than maybe on a video call?
It's always great, as we all know, to be in front of someone. It's always easier. But now with whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever, it's so much easier. We didn't have these tools years ago. It's so much easier to use those tools. I think the thing that I learned is that you want to make sure that when you're having a virtual meeting, that you treat it like a regular meeting. You want to make sure that you're giving people the same type of attention, respect. You want to try to make it as best you can. And a lot of people don't do this, just so you know, like as if you were meeting with that person directly. Anybody else? Still have a couple of minutes. Anybody else have any more questions? Yeah, in the back.
So one great presentation, by the way.
Thank
One
you.
thing we'll hear from, or rather just a natural reaction, is that when somebody starts batting back on objections, their mind kind of switches into, oh, this is a hard sell, so I'm gonna dump the whole thing. Is there any advantage to taking established objections and putting them on the front end, managing it as a resistance issue?
If I heard your question correctly, you're asking if you get objections right up front, is there a way to sort of address them up front? Is that your question?
Well, if you get familiar objections all
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
should you just kind of put them up front?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. There's a lot of sales tips I didn't go over today, but that's one of them that I do normally cover. So very often we might hear the same thing over and over again, and sometimes it's really great to start out the meeting by throwing the elephant right on the table and saying, you know what, you probably, I'm sure, have heard that we're really, really expensive and that you can't afford us. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to first address that right up front. And it's a great thing to do, because if they think in their mind that they can't afford you, do you really think you're ever going to get their attention? So it's nice to kind of get it out of the way right up front. Anybody else?
I really like a lot of what I've heard from you today. It's a real common sense approach to sales. But do you have any specific ideas when it comes to using lead magnets aside from copy? Do you understand what I'm asking? Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a lot of different lead generation products out there, and I don't think there's necessarily one that works better than the other, and obviously industry specific that comes into play. I think it's really important to look at the information you're getting and try to learn the source, learn about the person, and then based on all of that information, determine the best way to respond or not to respond. Because obviously we know that a lot of leads are not very good leads. They're just names, they're tire kickers, and the one thing you want to avoid is wasting your time and wasting your resources on people that are simply looking for a price and not going to buy. So, it's just really important to really take the time to learn as much as you can about the lead source and so forth. I think I'm out of time. I want to be respectful of my time. Thank you very much.